This passage from Revelation 13 describes the rise and actions of two beasts, symbolizing corrupt and blasphemous powers. The first beast, given authority to act for 42 months, speaks blasphemies against God and wages war against the saints, gaining global worship except from those whose names are written in the book of life. The second beast, appearing lamb-like but speaking like a dragon, enforces the worship of the first beast through miracles, deception, and economic control, introducing a mark without which no one can buy or sell. This mark, or the number of the beast, is famously identified as 666. Do you think John, who said this number was the number of a man, expected his first century readers to know who he was talking about? Let's find out. Welcome back, everyone, to our walk through Revelation, chapter by chapter. And today we're going to get back into chapter 13, starting at verse 5. But first of all, Ken, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, brother. I'm glad we're able to record today.
We've had a few problems. It must be going to be a good one. That's all I know.
It's going to be life changing because we've tried a couple different things, but as long as we're recording, we'll dive in. Jimmy, last video we left off on verse number 5, so let's dive into Revelation 13 and verse 5. Just as a way of reminder, we're looking at the chapter where we're talking about two different beasts. We're talking about right now the beast that comes out of the sea, which we've identified as Rome in previous videos, so we won't go into too much of that. And then later in this chapter, we're going to see the land beast, which will be identified as Israel. So let's go ahead and dive in verse number 5 and pick up with the sea beast. It says in verse number 5, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months." Now, this idea of 42 months, Jimmy, is of course, that's 3.5 years. Now, I grew up in a system of interpretation that's called dispensationalism. In a very general way, we could call it futurism. And that system teaches that there's a future 7-year period. And one of the ways that I was taught that, and I taught this for many years also from the pulpit, is that I would take these 42-month passages and I would combine a couple of them. And I would say, well, this is just talking about the tribulation part, but if you combine two of them, obviously that's how you get to your seven years. The problem with that is that this is mentioned 5 times in the book of Revelation. So if you combine them all, you get to 17.5 years. So then you're arbitrarily just putting 2 of them together. Well, there's 2.5 of those 7-year period. So I think what the Bible is saying here is that there's a 42-month period coming where there's the Great Tribulation, which we've already outlined in our Matthew 24 series. So we see that again, this time period is listed in this 42 months, which is roughly how long the Roman-Jewish war lasted, at least the very intense parts where the Romans took out Jerusalem, which is what we're talking about for the Great Tribulation. So let's go ahead and break down this verse. "And there was given unto him," the him here is talking about the beast that's come out of the sea, which we've identified as the Gentiles coming out of the sea, in this case, specifically the Roman Empire. Look at our previous videos on that. I'm not going over that in this video, but it's already been laid out. "So there was given unto him," that's the Roman Empire, "a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So very simply stated there, the Roman Empire was given the ability to take out Jerusalem and to have the Roman-Jewish war and to completely obliterate the Jewish temple. This would be ending the Old Covenant completely. And for more information on that, you can just simply read Josephus or any historian on the Roman-Jewish war. The heat of that battle where the Romans... the siege on Jerusalem was lasted for 42 months, from 66 to AD 70. So just a couple of thoughts on that. This is a reminder of the visions that we've already looked at in Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 and verse number 8. Jimmy, I just want to tell you, the last few videos, that you've been reading, I think has added so much, and it helps me so much, and I appreciate it. So if you don't mind reading again today, if you could read Daniel chapter 7 and verses 8, 20, and 25, please.
All right. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And then verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times, and the dividing of time.
So we see a couple of characteristics here that we carry over into our study. First of all, we're seeing that this is the 4th beast in Daniel. And remember, the successive kingdoms is what we're talking about in Daniel. So we have the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and then finally the one that Jesus was born in, the Roman Empire. Here we talk about this beast that we read about in Revelation, the Roman Empire, is given this mouth that's speaking these great things, these great words of blasphemy, these lofty ideas. And notice in verse number 25 that you read, it is given into his hand. What is given into his hand? Until a time, that's singular, times, that's plural. So most commentators, and I don't think there's any position that disagrees with this, but we have a time and times that would be 1 plus 2 is 3, and a dividing of time would be 3.5. So I actually, when I was a dispensationalist, they also took that as 3.5 years. I don't think that's a point of contention. I think most scholarly work will say that's 3.5 years. So I don't think that's a point of contention, but it matches up perfectly with what we're reading here in Revelation 13. So in other words, when we're talking about the Roman Empire being given a mouth, in other words, they have the ability to communicate, and what they are communicating is blasphemous words, and they're going to specifically have those words for 42 months. Speaking of the Roman Jewish siege in AD 66 to AD 70. So let's go ahead and head back. Maybe actually one more supporting verse, and that's Revelation 11. Yeah, Revelation 11 and verse number 2, which we've already read and we've gone into detail in a couple of videos ago. But let's go ahead and read Revelation 11 too.
But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months.
So we keep seeing this 42 months time period come up, this 42 months. And notice here, and we've already talked about this in our Revelation 11 study, obviously, but the temple is being measured. If you came home and you walked in your house and I'm measuring your kitchen, first of all, what on earth are you doing here, right? And I'm just measuring. I'm like, what's the big deal? I'm measuring your kitchen. What interest would I have in measuring your kitchen? I mean, your first question would be, who let Ken in, or why did you break in? But your second question would be, if somebody's going to break into our house, they might steal something, but he's got his tape measure out. If I said, no, it doesn't matter, nothing. I was curious how big it was. That's all, or let's make it less criminal. Let's say you come over to my house, and let's say you walk in and I'm measuring my living room.
Okay.
And you say, what, what are you doing? And I say, what? You don't measure your rooms? Now that would all be very, very odd. What would you walk away if you got back into your car and you're driving away from my house and you saw that I was measuring my living room? Very, very plain, basic idea. You'd be thinking, he's got a plan for the living room.
Yeah, he's going to get a new flooring. He's going to get a new carpet, whatever. Yeah.
doing something. So if I were to say to you, there's a destruction coming to my house. Let's just say I had knowledge that my house is going to be totally destroyed. And my living room was the access point to God. We have to use our imagination here. You walk in, and I'm measuring that part of the house. And I tell you, my house is going to be destroyed. But we were previously using my yard as a way to prepare ourselves to be able to get into the living room. I had to go through a number of steps. I had to wash my hands a certain way and so forth. And you were to say, okay, he's measuring the living room. Now that I know there's a purpose for it, we're gonna recreate the living room because the whole house is getting destroyed, and this is our access point to God. And you say, well, but what about the yard? And I say to you, oh, the people that are going to come destroy the house, I'm going to give it to them. They're just going to walk all over it. Okay, we have to put all these thoughts together. What we're reading about here is that the Romans are going to come in and they're going to destroy the temple, the access point to God. The courtyard, which was us getting prepared, is now not needed anymore. That means that God has another plan. We're no longer going through the Aaronic priesthood, and the high priest is no longer going to get prepared in the same way that he did with the laver and the brazen altar. Where he's no longer going to make that initial atonement for himself. This is all going to be different now. But we are measuring the temple. So there will be a temple, but there won't be any preparation into entering into the temple. So what he's saying is, don't measure the courtyard. We have no need for the courtyard. The courtyard itself, we're not going to reuse it, but we are going to reuse the temple measurements. In other words, there will be a temple system, but it will be a totally different approach. That's what's being said here. Another thing we should point out, Jimmy, as we're getting going here in verse number 5, is you'll notice here that we're talking about this 42 months, which links us back to the tabernacle temple idea. Look at verse number 6. And he, that's the beast of the sea, the Roman Empire, he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So what they were blaspheming, the idea of blaspheming is to make empty something that should be very holy, to make profane or regular something that should be very holy or set apart. And notice where they were doing this. They were doing this in the tabernacle. We learned in Revelation 11:2 that you just read, there's the temple they were measuring. So there's something very interesting here. Kind of the illustration that I've used before. I may have said it on your channel before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself because I can't remember. But I think a very good illustration. At least we can hear it again.
I
If
repeat
you and I,
myself every day, several
that's right.
times.
Yeah, that's right. It's good. It's good to hear it in repetition. But if you and I were to travel and go north from Tennessee. We go north, and we finally get to New York. And you and I are going to do a documentary on New York. Okay. Now, if we do a documentary on New York and we go to Yankee Stadium, we interview man on the street. We interview hot dog vendors. We talk about Times Square. We go into the park that's in the middle of the city there. And you and I also take a trip over to where the Twin Towers are because the year is 2000. We did this in 2000. And we look up and we see the Twin Towers. We talk about the office spaces that are in there and the way they were built with the steel they were built with. And our documentary is very, very precise. And we talk about what Rudy Giuliani did with, taking on the mob, and he, really cleaned up the city. And it's the year is 2000, and we're talking about everything. And we're talking about Patrick Ewing, for those of you who know sports, and I'm trying to think of some names back then. We're talking about Lawrence Taylor. Look at me getting New York sports on from 2000s earlier. And we do a documentary on that. Okay. Now, if you didn't know what year we did that, but you're watching this documentary and we show the Twin Towers, you could put down a chunk of money, safe bet it was before 2001. Why? Because a significant event happened September 11th, 2001, that made those two towers not there anymore. It would be crazy for me to make a documentary in 2024 and talk about the Twin Towers as if they were still standing and never mention their destruction. It actually, I would think in some ways, it would actually be kind of deceitful to make people who have never been to New York think that they're still standing.
Mm-hmm.
When was Revelation written anyway? Well, we've already done the Revelation dating game, but here we have these references to the tabernacle, the temple of God, still standing and being measured. Why are they being measured? Because they're going to be replicated later, but not the courtyard. Leave those out. The Gentiles are going to step on those for 42 months. They're going to trample them. And so here we see that they are speaking blasphemies against God, blasphemies against. Do you think the Romans cared about the temple or the tabernacle? No. The only reason they hated the temple, and Nero desperately wanted to see the temple come down. And eventually we see this with as Titus comes in and being commissioned for this before he was even Caesar. But the hatred was a hatred for the Jews. They only hated it because the Jews loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're speaking blasphemies against God, against his tabernacle, and against them that dwell in heaven. In other words, those that have that are in covenant with Christ. Couldn't stand people that were in covenant with Christ. These Christians, these Christ followers, I mean, they don't easily bow the knee. They don't take part of Nero worship. They don't take part of Caesar worship. Remember, we're writing to 7 churches that are in heavy Neronic worship. These are in hotbeds of Nero worship at the time of this writing. And so they are, these 7 churches are all having to make a decision. Do we go and bow the knee before Caesar? Remember what they shouted at the foot of Pilate, really. And he said, what should we do with Jesus? Is he a king? And they said, we have no king but Caesar. Well, what should I do with him? Crucify him. May his blood be on us and on our children. Well, what should we do with Barabbas? Set him free. Give us Barabbas. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. Let's go ahead and head into verse number 7. You got something?
I guess I was always taught that when they were measuring that, when he was told to measure that temple, he was measuring the next one that hasn't been built yet. He was already, he was measuring that one.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I'll go back again, and we could just kind of say this many times. Whatever thoughts we have of the text need to come out of the text. If anybody hears me teaching anything that is not from the Bible, or my thoughts aren't derived from the text, it needs to all come out of here. And if somebody wants to talk about a third temple idea, then I need to see a third temple here. Now, Jimmy, we're going to actually look at a supporting verse here in a little while in our study. It's going to go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. There is no, I'll say this clearly, and I'll challenge anybody on this. We can have a good time going back and forth with this. The Bible not one time ever teaches of any kind of a physical third temple. Not once, not ever. It's assumed. You already have to think that and then read that into the text. It never says that.
Yeah.
The only third temple talked about in the Bible is Jesus's body. And then when we become identified with him, then our bodies are identified with Christ and his identity becomes ours. Then our bodies all are making up this new temple that is Jesus's body. That's why he says, hey, your name is Simon, but I'm going to call you Peter. I'm going to call you Petros, stone. And Peter goes on and says, you're living stones built up. In Ephesians, it talks about we're building up into a house that's fitly framed together, it says in Ephesians. And we're that living temple because we are the body of Christ. That's the real third temple theology. So let's go to verse number 7. And it was given unto him, that is to the Roman Empire, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. There was nobody above the Roman Empire. They had total authority. If we could say they were a sovereign kingdom, and they had power over every nation, language, and tongues, and it was given them complete power. As you know, we know as being followers of Christ that God used them as an instrument of death. He used them as a punishing rod. But this beast had power over all of mankind. This is very, very similar to the empire that we see described in Daniel chapter 7 in verse number 21, where we're describing the little horn. So let's go ahead and read that real quickly. I know one day, Jimmy, we're probably going to do probably a study in Daniel. We sure need to, but at least people can get a flavor. Daniel's fairly simple when you understand its consecutive kingdoms: Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Grecian, Rome. And it's going chronologically, and the key phrase in there is in the days of these kings, somebody's going to come. And so all we're doing is following over, seeing the exact same imagery in Revelation and taking it at face value. So Daniel 7:21, brother.
I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them.
So they're making war with the saints is the key there. So the Romans are eventually going to take up the mantle of seeing the Christians as the ones that will not bow the knee to Caesar. And this is very similar to what we're seeing also here in verse number 17. We'll read that in a moment, that they're going to have to, these saints are going to have to make a decision. Are they for the Lamb or are they for the beast? Are you for Jesus or Caesar? And so we're going to see about this mark here that they're going to be forced to make a decision. We're going to look at that a little bit later in our study here. Let's go ahead and look at verse number 8. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So when we talk about Jesus being slain from the foundation of the world, that's not literal. What that means is that it was part of God's plan all along in his omniscience, that he knew he was going to redeem mankind. So this is not a plan B, as I was often taught. You know, Israel was plan A, Israel failed, so we have a parenthesis called the church. That's plan B. We're going to go back to a failed plan A after the church is raptured out. That's not biblical. This was the plan from the beginning. And Jesus coming and dying for the world and being the atoning sacrifice, the substitutionary atonement, it was plan A from the beginning. And notice here in verse number 8, this is another way of saying, basically, as in one way or another, all the unsaved will worship the Roman Empire as God. So we see the same language that if you're not saved, if you're not in covenant, if you're not in the Lamb's Book of Life, you are going to start viewing the Roman Empire as God and start worshiping the Roman Empire as God.
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.